Now, this is perhaps quite an old-fashioned way of doing things, but certainly when I was a young manager in the very, very early 1980s, was considered sort of pretty standard stuff and standard ways of looking at things. And if we look at the right-hand side at what a manager does, this is the bread and butter in every day, isn't it? The manager administers, they imitate, they take a template and they use it. They maintain systems and focus on those. They ask how we're going to do things and when we're going to do them. They tend to rely on control and they look at the bottom line. Most people do. You know, is this actually going to lose us money or make us money? And management is very often, or has been seen in the past, as accepting the status quo and making sure things are done efficiently towards the standards we've set, doing the thing right. And I talk to many practice managers and say, what do you think is the main purpose of your job? And a very large number will say to me, to ensure that the practice runs smoothly. And I can understand exactly why they say that. It's a sentiment that most of the time I would adhere to myself. But a leader looks at things in a slightly different way. And a leader, if you like, looks at quality in a slightly different way. It's very tempting to look at quality as setting some standards and making sure we adhere to them, using our audits and our checklists to make sure that we adhere to them. But a leader, if you like, will actually look at quality in a different way and say, how can we do things quicker, easier, smarter, better, cheaper, to make patients happier? And that's an uncomfortable place to be, but that's what a leader does. They innovate and they originate and they develop and build on ideas. They tend to focus on people rather than systems, and they ask what and why rather than how and when. Why are we doing things this way? What's the reason for continuing to do this? Leaders also, as you'll see in so much of the literature, do inspire trust rather than relying on control, and rather than looking at the bottom line. I love this one. They look at the horizon, not where are we now, but where are we going? Where are we journeying? They challenge thinking and they do the right thing. And those two last things on this particular overhead are terribly important because they do make the difference between being an effective manager and leader and an efficient manager and leader. Being efficient is doing the thing right, making sure it's done to a standard. But being effective is doing the right thing. And if you are looking to move your practice forward, to develop it, to take it on a journey to better things, to excellence, to growth, to delivering better patient care, to delivering better professional and personal satisfaction, then you really do need to be concentrating on doing the right things and not simply on doing the things right, important that those things are. Because you really need to be both to be a good leader and manager. You need to be both effective and efficient. And what is heartbreaking is when one visits practices finding people being very efficient, but they're being efficient at going round and round in circles rather than, if you like, on a journey somewhere. And why aren't they on a journey somewhere? Because no one very often has defined the journey, and there is a lack of leadership within the practice. The leader doesn't simply inspire trust and inspire followers by by focusing on people and looking at the journey. They also do it by looking at values and what's important. And that's an idea I'm going to come back to a little later on in this webinar. Because what I'd like to look at really are the 5 key areas of management, which if you have a handle on these, you should have a handle in your practice on its management. And it was the late great Sir John Harvey-Jones who said, interestingly, at a Code Dental conference many years ago, business is very simple. And we all heard a sharp intake of breath from the 200 or so delegates there, because we all thought, crikey, it seems rather complicated to us. But he said, no, it's very simple. That doesn't mean it's easy, but it is simple. And we can break down what good management looks like in terms of really 5 different things. And I always express these as a jigsaw because they are completely interdependent. If you are managing your practice well, you should be involved in its strategic financial planning in terms of the sorts of financial growth that you're looking at in terms of income and profitability, the sort of gearing that you want in terms of lending and how much of your practice you're indebted to other people for, the sort of loans you take out and all of those sorts of things. You do also need a very clear handle on day-to-day finances. I hesitate to use the phrase look after the pennies and the pounds will look after themselves, because it isn't quite true, but it is important to know how money works in your dental practice and not have to wait till the end of the year for your accountant to tell you how you have been doing over the year. And that means you need a clear and clear-headed understanding of accounts and also budgets. People who understand finance tend to be in control of it. And it's extremely important. CQC also say this, remember that outcome, which says, you know, that the practice is in basically a sound financial position. You need to be able to be confident for yourself, if you're a manager or a practice owner, that the financial management is sound and you are not relying on advisors to tell you it is. You should know that it is yourself. Very important. You also need a clear handle on the management of resources, everything from the property through to the equipment that you're using, and not forgetting IT. Now, for my money, the biggest investment most practices are going to need in the next few years are on communications technology, and very probably not on dental technology, because of the pace of change in communications technology. And when we look at how practices communicate with a much more technologically aware and younger and more technologically demanding audience for their services, it is really important that we are using 21st century methods to do that and not relying on mid to late 20th century methods. But that's another subject for another day. You need to be very clear about how you're going to resource that and how that links with how that's actually going to be funded. We also need to be very clear in terms of our marketing management, the sorts of services we want to provide, the sort of patients that we want to attract with those services, the level of clinical care we want to provide to an extent, but also the non-clinical management of patients. Very clear, we've got a very clear idea of that. And then linked with that clinical management, what sort of dentistry do we want to do and to develop? What special interests might we want to nurture? Are we going to be a preventive practice? Are we going to be involved in oral health targets? And how are we confident that we are compliant with both GDC and CQC, and indeed NHS requirements here too, in terms of perhaps the new contract, which is hoving into view on the horizon at the moment. And finally, how confident are we in our people management? Are we confident that we are recruiting and selecting staff both appropriately and effectively as well as legally? That we are not just doing the least that we have to do in terms of staff training and development, but we know we've got competent staff not just to fulfil the roles we have now, but the roles that we need for them to develop into. That we can motivate them, that we can lead that team in the way that we're expected to, and that we can build a competent and confident team to deliver our vision, if you like, for our practice. Now, as I said, this is explained as a jigsaw because all of these things are completely interdependent. If you don't get the money right, you won't be able to spend money on marketing to do the sort of dentistry you want to do and get the clinical outcomes you're after, and you certainly won't be able to attract the right people. Have the wrong people in place or not manage those people appropriately, and the rest of the jigsaw falls apart because services do not get delivered by systems. Systems don't do anything in themselves. Systems are delivered by people, and it's extraordinarily important that we are focused on making sure that our people management skills and our leadership skills are as highly developed as they can be, particularly in a smaller organisation where if you have only 10 people and one person isn't doing that which you need them to do, that is effectively 10% of your workforce, and that's a big, big worry. Now, this is quite an old model. I developed this many, many years ago, but it is an extremely useful model because it does help us, I think, to focus on and you act as a checklist for what are our skills and abilities in these areas. How up to date do I feel in all these areas? I might have been up to date 5 years ago or 10 years ago, but am I as up to date as I should be? I think this also begs another question to use this model, because many staff tell me that they don't feel very motivated within their practices. And they tell me that they know what they go in and do every day, but a lot of them say they don't really have any clear idea as to what they're supposed to be achieving. And activity does not motivate. Achievement is what motivates. Process is not progress. And activity is not really action. It's extremely important that we don't just say, what are we doing now? It's extremely important that we adopt that leadership hat and say, where are we going? And this, again, is actually quite an old model, but one I think that's worth looking at. And this is another 5-part model. I'm very keen on 5-part models. But it does help us to get into perspective some of the things that we ought to be focusing on. And no matter how much some of you may hate this phrase, mission statement, which was borrowed from the Americans and never given back because we thought of a better one ourselves, it is important that I think we understand what mission statements are about. It's extremely important that everybody in the practice has a very clear idea of what they're there for and what they individually and as part of the overall team are trying to achieve. Which means that embedded in the mission statement must be a very clear sense of what's important for the practice, what its values are, you know, what's good and appropriate and what is not good and what is inappropriate. And values may be approaches to patients or the way that we look at patients, the way that we do things, the way we treat people, both patients buying our services, referring dentists and each other. Mission statements, generally speaking, are not your statement, your strapline, if you like, for patients. They are there to enable everybody working in the organisation to know what they're there for, what they're adhering to in terms of values, and what they're trying to achieve. Very, very important. And I have plenty of stories, but alas, no time for them today, on mission statements that work and mission statements that do not. But I have seen more mission statements in dental practice which say our aim is to provide high quality family dentistry in a relaxed and friendly environment than I wish to see again. I'm very sorry if that is your mission statement, but it is really important that if you're going to say things like that, that everybody understands, for example, what high quality actually means. Is it just high quality in clinical care, or is it non-clinical care too? It's very important that people understand where we're actually going, what's important to us, and what good looks like. Because once you've set out what you were there for, you can then pull together the big picture, and it is a big picture, it's what we're trying to achieve across those 5 areas of finance, resource, people, clinical, and marketing. Not we're going to do a brochure or we're going to build a website, all those exciting things, but what is our strategy? What are the big steps that we need to take in order to get to this place that we want to be? We don't look at the detail, we need a very clear idea of the big steps, and we can then harden those down into some objectives. If you want the academic definition of strategy, here it is, very useful one. And this is one of the things that we talk in much more detail on the Code Dental Leaders course. Strategy is the direction and scope of a practice over the long term. Long term is not the end of next week, although sometimes it may feel like that. It's not the end of next month or even next year. Long term could well be 3 to 5 to 7, and for some of you, even 10 years. What's the direction and what's the scope of our activity? And how are we going to achieve advantage? Dentistry is a competitive environment. It always has been. It is even more so now. And we want to achieve competitive advantage for our practice over other people. How? Because we're going to use our resources to the max. And we're going to make sure that within this environment we are in, we understand exactly what the trends are, what the opportunities are, how we're going to ride on the crests of those waves and combat the threats that we perceive, so that we can meet the needs, the constantly evolving needs of our market, of our patients, of our potential patient base, and to fulfill their and other people's expectations, particularly if we are involved with the NHS, who have a key role to play and interest in the success of our practice. And strategy is exciting because it is mapping out the direction and gives you a greater sense of control than almost anything else within a practice if you have a clear strategy. Strategy is the what Tactics are how we're going to do it. Strategy is a high-level, senior thing that we have to do. Tactics we can and should get everybody involved in. Because strategy is this overall long-term plan. Tactics, the order and arrangement of tasks to achieve objectives along the way. And to harden up our strategy, we really need to put together these smart, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-bound objectives. Now, some of you may have done SMART many times before on courses. If you are not setting SMART objectives in your practice, you are really missing an extremely valuable and effective opportunity to get the right things done in the right way, at the right time, with the most appropriate use of resources. Very important that you have clear objectives in terms of what you're trying to achieve in each of those 5 areas. And because strategic objectives by their nature are long-term, that you have some good monitoring points along the way. So if your aim is to improve profitability by a certain percentage over a 3-year period, we are not going to wait till the end of 3 years to find out. We need to make sure that we are on track. Just as you would just check the map from time to time, or check that you've gone through the right town or past the right motorway junction if you're on a journey in the car. There are very great similarities. Then we can actually think about how we're going to achieve some of these things. But to get too involved too early on and say, I can't see how I would do that, therefore I won't aim for these things, is, I think, to deny yourself some of the great potential that lies within your practice. Because one has to think innovatively and creatively and think strategically, which means not looking at the hows immediately and actually looking at the what we're going to do. The hows will come later as part of the management process. And the hows very often are what the manager helps to do. The leader sets out the strategy and the direction.